It will stop in a second. Yeah, sorry about that.
Good morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Shaping Sustainable Cities. This is our special series here at Urbanize Hub that we are doing in collaboration with the Netherlands Embassy here in Romania. The main idea behind this project today is and this will be something that will keep on going for a few weeks, where we have 8 guests that we're going to meet at around 12 to every week. We're going to talk about how we shape sustainable cities together. The Netherlands has a lot of good case practices of cities that have become more sustainable, more citizen friendly, and we want to transmit this to our cities here in Romania, and to make sure that we exchange ideas both ways to find innovative solutions, because there is no copy paste way of doing great things. It's important to start from the ground up, from whatever you have, to build on it and to use the expertise and ideas of other people, but to find our original way of doing things. My name is Alex Glod. I will be your host for these live streams and podcasts that we will be hosting in the next few weeks. And today we'll start off with one of the things that the Netherlands is well known for, and that is the biking culture. Cycling is something that most people say that people in the Netherlands, when they're born on a bike, right? They know how to do this from an early age. And so we're going to have Chris Bruntlett from the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and he's going to tell us a great deal more about how we can develop that same cycling culture and export it to many more countries. And we also have the honor to have the deputy head of mission of the Netherlands embassy here in Bucharest, Arthur den Hartog. And I would love to give him the opportunity to tell us a few words about this partnership and what is the general mission and idea behind this project. Arthur, you have the stage.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, first of all, to yourself for introduction, and of course to Urbanize Hub, who has been our partner in organizing the campaign which starts today, and a campaign which is meant to bring, as you said, the attention of the Romanian public to the development of smart, sustainable, and resilient cities. Many thanks also to Chris Bruntlett, who will talk in just a few seconds, for accepting our invitation, and to the organization he represents, the Dutch Cycling Embassy, which is a long-run and very reliable partner in all our projects relating to biking and biking infrastructure development in Romania. So being Dutch, like you said, Alex, basically you're born on a bike. So I feel very comfortable here in this session. I'm very happy to see that bike culture is the topic that kicks off our campaign today. And for more than 4 years, our embassy has been supporting cycling in Bucharest, but also in Cluj, Timișoara, Constanța. And as we speak right now, my colleagues are also busy preparing a Think Bike webinar with the city of Iași. And we are not going to stop cycling in Romania here. We all go through very difficult times, of course, these days with the corona pandemic. And so social distancing would in fact be much easier if we could all bike to work, or if our children could cycle to school. At least it would help in keeping social distance and being out in the open air. In the Netherlands, this happens already at a large scale, and we have understood that cycling is not only efficient and economic and convenient, but it's also safe, healthy, enjoyable, and of course it's very good for the environment because it doesn't pollute anything around you. But what is extremely important to emphasize here, if you allow, is that cycling has become such a prominent part of our everyday life in the Netherlands, because our government, both at the local level and at the national level, is actively supporting cycling in any way. And to give you an example, the budget for cycling infrastructure in the Netherlands, that means making the roads and facilities to allow for cycling safely in the Netherlands, is approximately 40 million euros on a yearly basis. Mm-hmm. Even though I was born on a bike, I had no idea that my government is spending that much of money, that amount of money on cycling in the Netherlands. But now I realize why the infrastructure is there, and you need it. But of course, Chris will tell you much more about cycling in the Netherlands. So please let me stop here. I'll keep my live introduction short. I will stay tuned for the remainder of this session, and I really look forward to the entire campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arthur. It is a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for setting this beautiful frame. Because when we think of biking, I think in Romania, many people look forward to, like, they see the experience in the Netherlands, but they find it incredibly hard to do. And so today, the real mission is not just in terms of what can we do of infrastructure, physical infrastructure, but it's also in terms of mental infrastructure, to see how we make this also part of our everyday lives, because it's really not that difficult. Now, I will mention to the audience, I have lived in Amsterdam for 7 months, so I am a bit biased, but that was the city where I learned to bike. That's where I tried, doing this for the first time, and it has been, amazing. And it's an experience that I can truly testify to, that it's worth it. So before we begin, I just wanted to let know everyone here in the audience that is tuning in that you can leave us questions in the comments, and we will make sure to address it to our special guest, Chris Bruntlett. And allow me first to tell you more a bit about Chris. So Chris is Marketing and Communications Manager at the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and he will tell us a bit more about what the Dutch Cycling Embassy does. And he was, first of all, a long-time campaigner in Vancouver for biking, and he loved this idea. And so he co-authored the book, Building the Cycling City, the Dutch Blueprint for Urban Vitality. And so today, he'll tell us a bit more of how he has learned more about the Dutch way of cycling and how we can all benefit from it. So first, Chris, give us a bit of short presentation of what does the Dutch Cycling Embassy do exactly, and what has been your contribution to its story?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it's a bit strange having a Canadian guy here talking about how great the Netherlands is for cycling. But I think that is in part because cycling there has become so normalized and so accepted that, as Arthur was describing, people grow up on a bicycle, they don't think anything remarkable of it. But the Dutch Cycling Embassy came about in and around 2011, when the national government, who was being absolutely inundated with requests from overseas for workshops, study tours, information, journalists looking for quotes on stories they were writing about cycling, that they decided to set up this external organization called the Dutch Cycling Embassy, which was a public-private partnership between the national government here in the Netherlands and organizations that were working in the field of cycling and looking to export the 50 years of knowledge and expertise that's existed here and continues to exist here, and help cities and countries around the world better understand how these amazing conditions came to be and how they can start implementing them in their cities. So here we are 9 years later. We have about 75 different organizations in our network. They are private consultants, transport planners, engineers, and also public institutions like local governments. The National Rail Company is part of our network, technology companies, academic institutions, and they all collaborate on these projects where we get to host study tours of groups that want to come to the Netherlands and better understand the conditions here, going overseas and bringing teams of Dutch experts to hold workshops to help them start implementing these ideas. And as you can imagine, things have kind of transitioned to more digital outreach in recent months, but the demand has been absolutely unreal as cities try to fill the gap left by public transport and as Arthur was saying, provide more socially distant way to get from A to B that's not sitting inside a car and adding to the traffic congestion and pollution problems. The only other thing I will say, is it's really an amazing place to ride a bike here, and there are really no other countries in the world that are cycling at a scale or have built infrastructure on this level. And so there are many lessons to learn from the Netherlands, and part of my job every day is to do exactly that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, one of the questions that I think most of us have in mind is that, well, it's easy to say, cycling is easy in the Netherlands because everything is kind of built already around it. And I think some of us have the feeling that it's very hard to make these type of changes. And in your book, you have this very beautiful principle that streets are not set in stone. And maybe this idea of biking, you actually have a very good story in the book that I would love for you to give us a short snippet of. That's a story of Rotterdam, because Rotterdam, after the Second World War, they wanted to become a very futuristic city, to build the city around cars, and yet somehow they changed their mind in the meantime. So tell us a bit more of how did they change their mind, and how did they switch from the futurist, car-centric direction of the city and move towards biking?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to start with your first statement there, and that's this is a difficult task, and there's no doubt about it. It is hard, but everyone has to start somewhere, and the Netherlands started in the 1970s, and prior to that, they were headed the same direction as virtually any other city in the world. Their streets looked just like anywhere else, in that they were filled with cars, 4 or 6 lanes of cars, even in Amsterdam and these other cities that have gone on to take a different direction. And what's important to understand is they made a conscious choice to stop rebuilding their cities around cars, stop widening their streets and creating surface parking and all this space for automobile traffic, and start reorienting their streets for walking and cycling and public transport. And Rotterdam is probably the best example of that, because it doesn't have the historic bones, the really tight urban fabric that you may see in the more historical cities like Amsterdam and Delft and Den Haag. It was completely leveled during the Second World War by the Germans, and in the decades following, rebuilt in a really American style. It was going to be the Manhattan on the Maas River, with wide streets, tall buildings, residential areas pushed to the outskirts of the city, and completely redeveloped in a more North American way. And it was that turning point in the 1970s when traffic deaths were skyrocketing. People weren't able to walk or cycle in their neighborhoods. Children weren't able to play in their streets, and there was quite a dramatic OPEC oil crisis that hit and caused the streets to go car-free for 6 weeks. And after that, cities across the Netherlands, including Rotterdam, decided to retrofit their streets and not continue on this path towards automobility. So Rotterdam today has taken these really wide boulevards and retrofit them with plenty of space for walking, cycling, and have these beautiful grass tramways that run down the center of the street. So they've retrofit this post-war urban planning model into a more multimodal system. It's not to say that the car is non-existent. It's not to say the bicycle totally dominates, but it's a much more balanced system where all the modes of transport work together quite nicely.
Well, what's interesting is that, you mentioned a bit of the context for how this happened in Rotterdam. And to a certain extent, I think this is something that now you could say the situation we're in right now is quite in a similar way. So we have a great deal of traffic deaths in most cities that are like in Bucharest, it's very crowded, it's very noisy. And like you said, it's not really that much space to bike, not that much space to play. Like, to be honest, I missed the old days of having, the place where it wasn't necessarily a playground, but you would make it a playground, but now there's so many cars, you're afraid to, break someone's windshield or something. And you feel like, oh, okay, we'll have to resort to completely different spaces. And now the current crisis, well, it's not an oil crisis, but it's a crisis that kind of forces us to do things differently. We could say that the terrain is much more, let's say, it gives more chances for us to transition in this direction. But I think one of the challenges besides the infrastructure is also the culture of for people to see cycling as not just a fun way to exercise, but also as a means of transport. And I would love to take this opportunity to show just a few pictures of what it is in the Netherlands to bike. So it's not just, okay, you go out and you have fun, and it's not just for cycling fanatics. This is actually for regular people that bike to work, that do shopping on the bike. that they can take their friend and say, hey, where do you want me to drop you off? And funny enough, there's also the possibility of you transporting furniture, right? Because there you have these very specialized bikes that can transport a great deal of carriage. And so I'm curious about this aspect. Like, how do you think we can convince people to see biking as a more as an alternative way to transport and leave the car behind? How do you think we can do that, Bart?
Yeah, I think it's obviously two-part. There is the structural barriers that exist on our streets that are preventing people from cycling, and as you've wisely pointed out, the pandemic showed to us that a different reality is possible when all the cities went into lockdown and the cars weren't roaming the streets anymore. Suddenly we had all this space outside of our front door to interact with our neighbors and use the street as they were originally intended, and that was to walk and cycle and get outside and practice physically distant exercise that helps with our physical and mental health. But the mental barriers are perhaps just as important, and seeing the bicycle as a tool for transportation rather than a tool for recreation is quite the difficult task. And because we've relegated the bicycle to the sidelines in our cities and made it almost a plaything that we do on weekends, it's going to be very difficult to start reclaiming it for transport without helping people understand what the bicycle, how it can play a role in their life. And it's exactly as you said, going to the corner shop to get some milk and bread, going to a restaurant or cafe in the city. It's getting your kids to and from school in the morning. These are all possible with the right mindset and the right bicycle. But this is part of our role at the Dutch Cycling Embassy, is showing what that reality looks like. The morning school run, when there's very few cars, is a really healthy, happy, enjoyable place to be, and it really will take ultimately citizens demanding something different from their elected officials if those changes are to be made, because I think right now that barrier goes all the way up to the political level, because the politicians are scared of making changes that they perceive to be unpopular or controversial.
Indeed, even though to a certain extent they are pretty easy decisions, because it's not the same investment as you would make in building new roads or building new parking lots. That's a lot difficult. But when it comes to making space for a bike, it doesn't really require the same amount of investing in the same infrastructural hazard. But the good thing is because there's one, I think, important point, because some people would think to themselves, let's say people living in Bucharest, where let's say it's mostly a flat city, so it is incredibly bike friendly. You don't have to go up very steep hills or something like that. But the question is distance, right? Because Bucharest is very, very wide. So if you want to go from one part of the city to the other, to go to the extremes, it can take you a great deal of time. And the point is also not to see that we move directly from just biking, but a beautiful way of integrating biking and public transit. And again, a few pictures that I believe are incredibly, as a good case practice for what we see in the Netherlands are these parking lots in the train station. So you have the examples here that most people, if they commute, they say that they're going from a city that is close to Amsterdam or to Rotterdam, they leave their bikes at the train station, then they go there. And there's also other programs that people use. And this is something pretty normal to see. But if you were to make the same space available for as many cars, we would need probably a whole neighborhood just to fit in as many cars as we have bikes in this image. So what good case practices have you seen in terms of connecting these two to making cycling and public transport go together?
Yeah, I think it's a tremendous point, and it's something that perhaps those working in the cycling field are quite hesitant to admit, and that is that the bicycle has its limitations. The vast majority of cycle trips here in the Netherlands are under 3 kilometers and usually tap out at a distance of 5 kilometers. So for those longer distance trips, 10, 15, 20 or more kilometers, the bicycle has to work in combination with the public transport system in order to actually compete with the car and replace that car trip, because the bicycle and the train, tram, or bus will provide the same door-to-door convenience as the car, because not even the public transport system will pick you right up at your door. So you have to really combine the two, and that's what they do really well here in the Netherlands, not just at the train stations in each city. Here in Delft, they have 10,000 bicycle parking spaces at the central train station for a city of 100,000 people. It's quite astounding, but they also have secure bike parking at the tram and the bus stops to allow people to park their bike, lock it, and know it's going to be left in a secure location, and then provide them with a last mile rental bike on the other side of their trip. So a lot of the journeys here are bike, train, and then bike on the other side. That journey has to be made as seamless as possible, though, and this is the point we're always trying to make. Here in Delft, you can cycle right into the train station, up to a bike parking space. You lock your bike right then and there, and then take the escalators directly down to the train platform, which is underground, tapping your smart card, and then you can rent the bike using the same smart card on the other side of your journey. So it's made incredibly convenient, it's made incredibly seamless, and therefore people don't think about taking the car for longer trips, because they have this really great bike train combination that exists in competition with that, and it's very time competitive as well as much more enjoyable.
Indeed. Actually, now I feel bad that I didn't have my OV card to show it, because that was indeed a very convenient thing. The fact that whenever I was going to Rotterdam or other cities in the Netherlands, I could simply use that card, rent the bike from the train station, and I could just go explore the city this way. And indeed, it's and it might seem like incredibly hard to make these changes, but at the end of the day, the point is it becomes a lot easier for the end consumer, which in this case is us, the citizens, right? Because we are the ones that benefit from these services. And while there might be, a lot of back-end work, I do see that we should prioritize the experience for everyone else. And right now, indeed, part of the friction is very much that the infrastructure isn't as friendly yet. But I would like to also continue on the fact that one of the good things that I love about the Netherlands is that it's not just the cities that are very well connected in terms of biking infrastructure. It's actually the whole country. Like if you wanted to bike from Amsterdam to Eindhoven or Rotterdam, you could, right? There are bike lanes for that. I remember I used to go in the weekends to see the small cities around Amsterdam, going all the way to The Hague, as well as to the seaside. And that's something that is incredibly useful. So let's say for Romania, that's incredibly hard to do, but there could be a great deal of potential for connecting the metropolitan areas, because there is also a lot of commuting in Bucharest specifically coming from outside, from these smaller cities. And I was wondering, like, how would you see that working, or how did it happen for the Netherlands? Like, was that the vision from the very beginning that, okay, we're not just going to connect the city, we're also going to connect cities in between them, or did that come later on?
Yeah, I think that's been a more recent development, but it's important to stress that a lot of those rural cycling routes are mostly intended for recreation. And so they are for couples or families or tourists that want to do these longer distance cycle runs and experience a bit of the countryside and the villages and perhaps travel from city to city. What we're seeing even more recently is the creation of these fast cycling routes or cycle superhighways, which are taking some of these rural cycling routes, 15 to 20 kilometer stretches of them that maybe connect certain residential or employment or commercial centers, and making them a bit more enticing for transportation, understanding that people's time budgets are usually about 45 minutes to an hour. With a nice e-bike, you could do 15 or 20 kilometers fairly comfortably in that period of time. But the infrastructure has to be made quite enticing. And that means widening the cycle paths, making them nice, red, smooth asphalt, and making the route as direct as possible to get them to their their destination. And so we're seeing more and more of these fast cycling routes being built all across the country, as again, a competition to the already strained road and train networks. So a lot of them run parallel to the train lines and motorways, and people that are sat on a crowded train or in a traffic jam will look over at this beautifully lit, smooth cycleway and say, hey, maybe I could try that 1 or 2 days a week, maybe not necessarily 5 days a week, but when the weather's nice, it is a kind of an enticing option to get out of the car or train to try longer distance trips. And as I said, with the rise of the e-bike now, almost half the bikes sold here, new bicycles sold here in the Netherlands, are electric assist. They're proving hugely popular amongst the elderly population, people that have to travel longer distances. And we're seeing the stats bear out that is in that people are traveling with the e-bike. It's encouraging them to travel more frequently, further distances, and allowing people with less physical ability to also cycle, because they don't have to necessarily use their whole energy, but they're still getting a health benefit from riding that e-bike.
And like you said, especially now that mostly people are also vulnerable in the context of COVID-19, it's a lot more dangerous for them to use public transport. It's a very healthy alternative for them, but also in the fact that we're leaving the car at home, and also this has an impact in terms of the emissions and the air we breathe in between our cities. We're going to have one final question from my side, and then we do have a few questions in the comments. So if you want to have a question directly addressed to Chris, please do that in the comments and we'll address it. So this is probably the hardest question, but that could be addressed to someone. But let's say you are now the mayor of Bucharest, because we do have a new mayor of Bucharest, soonly elected. And what would be the first things you would prioritize in a city that has over 2 million inhabitants, with almost an extra 1 million coming and working here, so transiting the city, and with over 1.4 million cars, not bikes. It would be nice to have 1 million bikes, but with over 1.4 million cars, and with a lot of streets just jammed with cars that are taking even the sidewalk. What would be the priorities for the next few years in order to help introduce the bike culture, but also solve this problem of congestion and a city built around cars?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, so to speak. And I would just come back to something I said earlier, in that politicians need to understand that these types of changes are perceived to be controversial or perceived to be difficult, when in reality they are actually largely popular. And there are very few politicians that have gone out on a limb and started reallocating space on their streets and regretted it. There may be an initial outcry, an initial backlash from a vocal minority, but in most places, the vast majority, 70, 80% of the population is behind. They may not be able to attend city council meetings and lobby for these changes on social media or email, but they would like their child to be able to get to school safely. They would like to be able to just cycle to the cafe or corner store or just walk. And any politician that does put themselves out there and start making these changes, history has shown that they usually have no problem getting reelected to continue this momentum. And I would just stress to any politician that don't let the vocal minority dictate the conversation. As far as priorities go, it's just a question of space and reallocating that space in a more equitable and efficient way. As you say, the cities are growing quite quickly, and we cannot continue to create space for the car. The streets can't go any wider. The parking lots can't get any bigger. So we have to look at using the space we have in more efficient ways. And when at the end of the day, creating space for walking and cycling is just a tiny piece of the road network in your city, but it has to be done with diligence and a willingness to do it right. And that's why we're always stressing to think at the network level and connect as many origins and destinations in your city through a combination of traffic calming. So that's slowing and reducing the volume of cars on your streets, and then on the routes where that isn't possible, to create physical separation and protection from the motor vehicles.
And I'm curious, what would you, for example, out of these two options, building, let's say, around places of interest, let's say schools. For example, schools right now would be a very good option to make sure that children are not exposed if they were to bike to school. Unfortunately, right now, online schooling is the only option here in Bucharest. But would you prioritize building around neighborhoods and saying, okay, we're going to connect the people in this neighborhood to the schools, to the shopping mall or something like that? Or would you follow, let's say, the metro lines? Would you follow the already circulated directions? Which of these two would you prioritize?
I think it has to be the former, and especially now during the pandemic, as we live our lives more locally, people are staying in their neighborhood, they're staying close to home, they're trying to shop locally. We have to make those trips in and around their house safe and comfortable and easy. And the other consideration, I guess, is the economic vitality and resiliency of these neighborhoods. And people will only visit the shops and spend money locally if they can actually access them. And they have access to all kinds of online retail that they can order. But you have to give them a reason to leave their house and come and spend money at your restaurant or butcher shop or whatever it happens to be. And so it's definitely about making those local trips that people make throughout a day far more frequently than the trip to work or long distance trips around the city. And you can build out from there once you've got these neighborhoods in place that people feel comfortable walking and cycling around.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I would love to give this opportunity to two important questions that have been asked in the comments, because I believe they're very valuable, even though we're going a little bit over our time slot. So this question comes from Florin Grigorescu. How is bike parking organized in the residential area, especially around apartment blocks? What is the security level that makes the user park their bike there? So in terms of how does that type of infrastructure look like so that people feel secure about that?
Yeah, it's not great, to be honest. And this is, I think, maybe one of the, there are certainly transferable lessons from the Netherlands, but residential bike parking may not be one of them. In that, because the bikes here are so cheap and available, there's more bicycles than people. You can get a used bike for around €100. Most of them just live on the street. So in lieu of a car parking space, they'll have 5 or 6 stapled bike racks on the street, and the residents who live there just pile their bikes on it. Perhaps a more recent development, which is of interest, is these bike hangars, which are kind of covered, secured bike parking spaces that some residents have invested in, and especially now with the e-bike situation, are so that the residents have a key where they can slide the roof off of this hangar and access the bike parking there. Another more recent development as well have been these kind of neighborhood bike parking facilities, because the buildings are also old here and there's not a lot of space to retrofit for bike parking. Sometimes they will take up a retail storefront or an old corner store and convert it into neighborhood bike parking. It may only contain 50 or 60 spaces, but that's enough for the residents on that block to securely store their bikes or cargo bikes, or and without the worry of leaving it out on the street. But bike theft remains a huge problem here. And there's something like 800 to 1,000 bikes stolen every day across the Netherlands. It's kind of become part of the circle of life here. But there's no reason that some of those solutions can't be implemented elsewhere. And again, because with the e-bike, people are looking at €1,000, €1,500. They're not going to want to necessarily leave that on the street. And you've got to make sure also, not just at the start point of their journey, but at the destination, they have a secure place to park. So parking in the city center is critically important. And the train stations, as we talked about, it's such an underappreciated aspect of this infrastructure discussion, is the start and end of trip facilities for the bicycles themselves.
Indeed, I remember there was this joke that I used to hear from the Dutch people saying that a bike is stolen 10 times during its lifetime, and then at the end it's thrown in a canal. Um, but indeed, this is a very valid point that now that with the development of e-bikes, I've heard of this concept of closed by key, and I was just wondering in the case of the blocks that give the place for a usual department store for parking. The people pay, I would assume, a small fee for that, right?
Yeah, but it's owned and operated by the municipal government. So they're in order to kind of alleviate the crowding on the streets, the clutter on the streets, which can become an accessibility problem for people with strollers and wheelchairs. They are investing in a small amount of floor space because they can double stack the bicycles, create these two-tiered bicycle racks, and cram a lot of bikes into a small amount of floor space. As you've said, the equivalent car parking would be acres, but in this case, it's quite an efficient use of space.
Indeed. One final question comes from Dichabal Puyu, and he was, how do you see the reconfiguration of traffic after we made room for bike lanes? For public transport and for cars that make up over 40% of traffic for the transport of goods and services. So how would you see this reconfiguration that, okay, now let's say we have 3 lanes on the big cities, and let's say 1 lane we dedicate to the bike, we put proper protection in place. What do you do with the people there? Like, how would they reassess around traffic?
Yeah, this is a tremendous point. And coming from a place with all the cycling infrastructure, people come here assuming it's an absolute nightmare for the people that want to drive and need to drive. And actually the opposite turns out to be true. The Netherlands is regularly rated one of the best countries in the world to drive a car because of its low levels of traffic congestion, because everybody out there on a bicycle is one less person on a car and using far less space on the street. But having said that, it has to be done with a network-based approach, and it has to be done properly, because if you're just providing individual bike lanes that don't connect anything to anything, then you're not replacing car trips, and that's when you can in some cases create more congestion on the street if you're removing a lane of car traffic. Public transport is something I would emphasize you don't want to take away from. It should be the first priority on your street. So any bus lane or bus rapid transit you have, you should try and maintain that space, and then carve into the space that's been allocated for the single occupant automobile. One of the smartest things I heard, or one of the really great things I heard from an engineer here in the Netherlands, was that they've come to the understanding that the capacity of a street is not dictated by its width. So we tend to think that a 3-lane road moves more than a 2-lane road, when it's in fact the design of the intersections and that dictate the capacity of that street. So a 2-lane street can actually move more cars than a 3-lane street, or a 1-lane street could move more cars than a 2-lane street, provided that those intersections are designed properly, the traffic lights are timed intelligently. And in a lot of cases here, they've switched to a roundabout configuration where there's actually no signalized crossing. So there is, because the pedestrians and cyclists are prioritized, in some cases the cars have to pause and wait for that person to cross through the roundabout, and then they're on their way with very little delay. And so the roundabout has emerged as a very safe solution at intersections, but also a way to maintain the capacity of the street without, whilst also perhaps reducing the number of lanes on that street. And I think it's a very counterintuitive way to think about traffic flows in the city, but it ultimately turns out to be the case, as they've proven here in the Netherlands.
Well, we still have a few questions that are coming in, but I wouldn't want to go more than the time we allocated for today. But this is something that kind of makes us very happy, in the sense that the point of these discussions is to open people's interest and to connect the people here with the resources that are available. So how can we continue following the Dutch Cycling Embassy and you? Where can we find some valuable resources so that we continue this conversation and who they can get in touch with. Hopefully, we have people tuning in that are experts in public administration or working there. And if they would want to also get in touch with you, what should they do?
Yeah, we're here to help. Exactly. I mean, it's that simple. So our website is dutchcycling.nl. We can also be reached by email at info@dutchcycling.nl. We're on all of the social media channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And as Arthur was saying earlier, we are quite active now in Romania. We've connected with the embassy there. We're hoping to plan some Think Bike workshops in the future. And we're excited to see where we can help Romania evolve their cities into more incredible places, as I get to enjoy here in the Netherlands each and every day.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And I, for one, again, I am biased, but I'm also looking forward to enjoying the same experience here in Bucharest and across Romania. Thank you very much, Chris, for participating in this conversation. Thank you to everybody that has been tuning in and asking questions. And it's unfortunate that we didn't have time to put in all the questions, but do make sure to follow the Dutch Cycling Embassy, follow the work that Chris and the people there do, and do get in contact with them if you are part of local administration. It's part of why we are doing these things. And we're going to continue Thursday with a conversation around green cities, also around how we design the green spaces in a way that is more human-friendly, that it embellishes our experience going outside of the house, because we do still need to get outside of the house. Even though it's the pandemic, we need to breathe and we need to feel that we are part of a healthy environment. So let's shape sustainable cities together, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much, and follow Urbanize Hub and stay in touch for our next live streams.